Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tight 10. It's been about a week, maybe 2 weeks now that I've done this. Um, I've been on a lot of other podcasts lately, so just glad to get back into it and give you guys all the latest news and notes and analytics that we can. It's the Tight 10 once again. Let's do it. Let's start us off with some notes that we have about the Packers offense and their receivers. The importance of Christian Watson on the Packers cannot be overstated. He came in sixth on the most important player list for the team. The signal I'm getting is from the highlighted sentence that says he's entering training camp with Watson, Golden, Reed are the only receivers in which the coaches can feel comfortable playing sustained reps. Uh, and what that means to me is we're going to see higher route shares from Watson, Golden, and Reed than we normally do. So the impact there, I think the Packers are famously the type of team that rotates receivers a lot. And now we're seeing a situation from everything that I've read, and we'll get into it a little bit later too, is that these three receivers will probably play more than the receiver rotation that we've seen in the past when you added in Romeo Dubs, um, Dontavian Wicks, those types of guys. And now we're going to this more tight, uh, three wide receiver rotation. So that elevates the value of all three of those players. On top of that, Tucker Kraft was listed as the Packers' third most important player. Uh, the writer here also thinks that he could see a target boost. Um, and my take is really like we might see some ramp here for him this season, just because he's coming off the ACL injury. He didn't really have a chance to do anything crazy in OTAs or minicamp, which means to me that he didn't have the ability to work on anything expansive with his route tree in the offseason, which is huge because he's not necessarily a good route runner. He's a good like leak out tight end who benefits from staying underneath and creating yards after catch opportunities. I still think he's a really solid price. I just don't think that he is. I think it's unlikely that he's developed new skills just given the fact that he's had to come back from rehab on his knee, not rehab for anything else. So I do see him getting more opportunities from a target perspective. He was one of the top tight ends before he got injured last year, and I think he has a chance to do the same thing and potentially be a top two target earner in this offense. Um, the Saints are still viewing Devon Vele as their wide receiver three for those of you in deep leagues, and then also leagues that have dynasty or something like that, where you're looking at a guy like Bryce Lance. Pretty huge because Bryce Lance is kind of looking more like a wide receiver four for that team right now. But given the research, I don't think that he's going to end up with significant playing time this year. Bryce Lance, that is, given the fact that he was kind of a later pick, and anybody that's not kind of like I can show the charts here too, but anyone that's a round four or above or later pick in the NFL draft usually doesn't get a meaningful route share. This chart here shows kind of like the route shares based off of your draft capital. Um, and this is like, okay, even a third rounder, the odds of you get to like a 43% route share by the end of the season, a second rounder, 60%. And obviously there's people that are above and below that end up kind of dealing with this trend and updating this trend. But for the most part, people kind of sit within these ranges. So anyone that's like a fourth round pick at receiver usually is not going to get very much playing time this season, which is totally fine. But it's just good to know when you're going through, and if you have a deep league, uh, good to have that in your back pocket. The Athletic was doing a series on breakout players. These are predictions by writers. The breakout player that the Athletic had for the Bears was Luther Burden. And I'm taking this with a major grain of salt, but it's nice that he was thought of for this. And I think that it's very obvious that it's either him or Colston Loveland that are the two most um, kind of dynamic breakout options for the team. But if you guys don't remember from the offseason, there was a quote by Ben Johnson, head coach of the Chicago Bears, who basically called him he called Luther Burden a stock that he's buying right now. So the quote exactly is, "I'm buying Luther Burden stock right now." He talks about how he was electric, referred to the receiver spring growth as electric. And he's had an opportunity to build a relationship with Caleb Williams and grow that chemistry. We saw him step into higher route share by the end of the season last year, where he started to produce, not necessarily in the playoffs, but in other situations. And there might be some more quotes that I have here coming forward soon, but yeah, I think he's the underneath receiver, and that is really beneficial in fantasy football. I wrote an article about route depth, and Luther Burden was one of the targets that I threw out there because of what he's going to do and play what I consider the Amon-Ra St. Brown type of role in the offense, where he's doing most of the underneath work, creating yards after catch. And Ben Johnson has said as much, that he is more of a uh, dynamic player in the offense, and so that to me signals, and we're going back to the fantasy signal analyst that I am, it signals that Luther Burden is likely to be in that underneath role, which is going to be huge for fantasy. Breakout for the Browns was Quinshon Judkins. And a lot of this comes back to the fact that he didn't really practice as much before the season last year. And so he didn't have an opportunity to showcase what he could do in the pass game. Doesn't mean that he's going to be that involved in the pass game, but potentially we could see an uptick in his pass down role and usage. I'm still kind of skeptical given kind of the what we've seen out of Todd Monken when it comes to backfield leaders. He's kind of shared that backfield role between uh, more of like a rushing player and a passing player, and it could be the fact that he had disparate skill sets in his backfield. When you talk about Derrick Henry and Justice Hill, and just how those two kind of pair together, Gus Edwards and Justice Hill, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, Peyton Barber and Jaquiz Rogers, Doug Martin and Charles Sims. That's the one to me that gets me, because I do think Doug Martin had that receiving skill set, but it's good to know that they are at least talking about him potentially doing stuff in the past game. I don't necessarily see him doing too much there, but it was news worth reporting. The Texans breakout was Jaden Higgins. There's a continual drumbeat that I keep seeing when it comes to Jaden Higgins having a big role in 2026, and really, to me, it all comes back to how does CJ Stroud perform, and the fact that this team did a lot of changes to their offensive line. I could see the team come out of the gate struggling a little bit, but now they have a reliable run game, or at least a back who could produce in the run game and limit negative plays in David Montgomery. Always been one of the top players in missed tackles forced. There's continuity with the offensive coordinator and CJ Stroud, something that hasn't happened as much in his career. And so there are some things that are trending up. It may take a few weeks at the beginning of the season with a new O line, but I do think that Jaden Higgins has an opportunity to do something special this season and is a good value, especially if we see CJ Stroud take a step forward. I'm not a huge Stroud guy, but you know, getting him in a situation where he now has more reliable offensive line, even if it takes a couple of weeks, I think that is very helpful for players. I did write an in-depth article on fantasy points called Fantasy Factors. That's kind of my own coined article series that just went through some of the top takeaways from OTAs. That also goes into each individual team, but also the top storylines. Feel free to check that out. And I had a podcast with Graham Barfield where we went through some of those top storylines and actually went in more depth on some of the players, and you could get his takes as well. Raiders breakout pick was Jalen Naylor. The beat thinks that he has an opportunity to be the team's wide receiver one, given the fact that they don't really have much else. I think that it's going to end up being some sort of split from a week to week basis between Naylor and Trey Tucker. And I really don't know which one of the two are going to be more of the deep threat versus the shorter target, because both of them kind of operated in some of a deeper role in their past. I think that Trey Tucker has typically been more of a deep threat type of player. So I would kind of lean towards him being the deep guy and Naylor being the short guy. And as I said before, that short opportunity is more valuable for fantasy, but you know, we don't know. So I think this is a situation we got to keep an eye on and read more about during training camp. Uh, Daniel Popper has kind of been all over this, like Charlie Kolar being a breakout player for the Chargers, someone that he sees getting more pass game opportunities than we all suspect. I don't like hearing it. I'm a little concerned. I know there's another note that I have on Rondé Gadsden that's coming a little bit later from the team website. Um, but I do think that Charlie Kolar has more receiving skills than he's been able to display. Um, just been in situations where he's kind of had to be that tight end three or blocking tight end. But he has had big plays in the past. I distinctly remember, and I don't have the stats on this, but I distinctly remember him catching a deep pass in one of those Ravens games, either last year or 2 years ago, and me just being upset because I always thought that it was Mark Andrews. um, so I'm cooling on Rondé Gadsden and what he might end up doing. I'm a little scared that his route share won't necessarily be in that 60% plus range, but maybe there's situations where if the Chargers aren't favored, I think that's maybe 5 games this season, you may have an opportunity to play a guy like Rondé Gadsden in those situations because you know that they might lean more heavy into the pass game. Okay. Then we have a note on George Kittle, and all reports have been very positive when it comes to George Kittle. The report itself is saying that he's ahead of schedule. Um, there's good insight into what his physical therapist activity has been, and a nice quote from Kyle Jusick that I will get into. But I just in general, I think that everything's pointing to wheels up for George Kittle. I covered this with Graham Barfield in our podcast that we did yesterday. But my perspective on George Kittle is that you can have it all when it comes to him. So what I mean by that is you can go get your RB one, two, maybe even a third one if you wanted to. Get your wide receiver one, two, three. You can get your quarterback if you want as well. And then you can tack on George Kittle given where he's going. And I don't know that he's even going to miss a week. He might miss week one, just given the fact that it's a game that's in Australia and the team doesn't really want to risk him traveling and how he can do his rehab in between. But from week two on, I think the wheels are up for George Kittle. You may see a little bit of a slow start from him. But you can probably pair him with other players, and maybe even if he misses week one, Jake Tungs would probably be a great streamer for that first week if you can put George Kittle on an IR spot, or if you just have an extra roster spot to put in a guy like Jake Tungs. Huge on George Kittle. We got a lot on Stefon Diggs in all of my reports lately. Jeremy Fowler's been talking about him a lot. So have the NFL insiders with Rappaport, Cameron Wolf, others. Um, Everything that I keep hearing comes back to Diggs potentially joining the Commanders or Ravens. That the Commanders are no longer really that interested in Brandon Ayuk, just given the situation. That all of those videos seem to be real about Brandon Ayuk. And then there's 5 teams that are pursuing Stefon Diggs, but we don't really know much about who those other 3 teams are. But we should hear more soon. So that's the report from Jeremy Fowler. There's more reports that are coming later in this show. So we'll continually get to it. I had Justin Herzig agree with me on that George Kittle take. Justin Herzig, $1 million winner, Best Ball Mania winner. So definitely a guy that you want to be plugged in with. I see a super high variance situation for Keon Coleman. He could be the wide receiver 3. He could be a game day inactive. Also noted that Joe Brady's biggest emphasis to Coleman is maintaining a professional mentality on and off the field. My take for real on this situation is that we already saw what ended up happening with Keon Coleman. Do we think he's going to grow more this year? I don't think so. Um, we saw that the coaches were willing to make him a game day inactive, and they didn't have any receivers last year. And now you're talking about adding a guy like DJ Moore. Um, Khalil Shakir was limited some part of last year too, uh, and still nothing was coming from Keon Coleman. They had Josh Palmer miss time. They had to result into leaning heavier into Tyrell Shavers. Brandon Cooks was added to the team. And now they drafted Skylar Bell, which reports were really strong from him from OTAs, even though he ended up leaving OTAs a little bit early with an injury. I think that this is going to be Skylar Bell that kind of takes this wide receiver three role eventually this season. It probably will be a rotation, just given what they're looking for and what they need. But if Skylar Bell is good, then he could just stay out there. And we know what Josh Palmer is, and we know what Keon Coleman is. So if I'm taking shots for best ball or rookie drafts or dynasty, something like that, where I just have like extra room, Skylar Bell's the one that I'm most interested in. Moving on to the Falcons quarterback situation. This is pretty easy, guys. Phoenix still hasn't been practicing. We're not sure when he's going to practice, if it's going to be early training camp, later, whatever that is. All the chatter kind of just signals that Kevin Stefanski is leaning into a player that is more accurate. And all of those superlatives um, drive you to think that this is going to be Tua Tagovailoa that is going to be the quarterback one to start the season. That doesn't mean he keeps the job, but if he does well, we've seen what Tua can be. It's going to be a very consolidated offense. So I think that if I'm drafting a Falcons quarterback, it's going to be Tua. Terrence Ferguson was listed as the Rams breakout pick in the same article, and I keep continually hearing that they're using Terrence Ferguson as their wide receiver three. And if they don't sign anybody else, he's basically going to fulfill that role, kind of in a Tutu Atwell situation. He's a deep threat tight end, which I don't necessarily love, but his price is so cheap that what if they just do something different? What if Devontae Adams gets injured? What if Puka misses time? Could he step into a bigger role? Yeah, absolutely. He showed in college that he's able to operate in the middle of the field on intermediate routes, on underneath routes. He's an athletic player. If they just so happen to see a spot where they can put him in a shorter route depth role, I think that he could thrive. From the Giants, the breakout pick was Isaiah Likely. They're using words like unquestioned number one tight end, along with previous reports of him being the top target. I've come around on Isaiah Likely. He was a guy that I was kind of avoiding at first, just thinking about his route shares. Uh, and thinking about, okay, I still think Theo Johnson would be that inline tight end, but everything I read is that they want to be more in 12 personnel and that they kind of want to feature Isaiah Likely, especially with Malik Neighbors potentially not being available early in the season. And the question marks that they have at wide receiver two, three, four, all the way on down. I think they're going to have to feature Isaiah Likely this season. I think a 70% route share plus is very much in the cards. And if he hits that, he can produce quite a bit, especially being a top two targeter in this offense. Good value, in my opinion. Football Insights posted a O line ranking. You guys should check that out. It was just a consolidation of all the different places that are outputting O line ranks. But I do think that that is really valuable because it signals which offensive lines are going to probably create enough time for quarterbacks to throw, create enough holes for running backs to have explosive plays, things that lead to fantasy points. Broncos number one, Eagles number two, Rams number three, Bears number four, Bucks number five, and whoever wants to check this out can check this out on their own some other time. AD Mitchell was listed as the Jets breakout pick. He's a locked in starter and has strong chemistry with Geno Smith, who looked his way more often than Garrett Wilson. Uh, I keep thinking this, but I think that Geno Smith is going to have a better time this season than he did last season because last season, the Raiders' offensive line was potentially one of the worst offensive lines that we've seen in quite some time. And the Jets are kind of ranked in that offensive line ranking as basically adequate at 18th in the consensus rankings. Uh, but that is a huge improvement year over year. And if he has some time to throw, he can really be one of those guys that puts it on a rope deep to AD Mitchell. He's been a good deep ball thrower in the past. I think he can elevate the performances that we've seen out of Garrett Wilson. Not that Garrett Wilson needs an elevator, but he just hasn't had an adequate quarterback in the past. And I think that Geno Smith can be that. I'm actually somewhat buying into this Jets offense for this season. Um, More details on Emeka Egbuka, who was the breakout pick for the Buccaneers. He was listed as the fact that he's going to be the full time Z receiver, which Matt Harmon talked about. You guys can check out Matt Harmon's work. I'm actually going to be on his podcast on July 23rd. But you can check out his podcast about Emeka Egbuka and why that Z receiver role is so great for him, which I completely agree on. But he suffered a hamstring injury, and he started being on the injury report in week 7 last year. This isn't in the article. This was my own research. And then he started rotating through every single role in the offense. So X receiver because Mike Evans was missing time, slot because Godwin was missing time, and that's a lot to ask out of a rookie receiver, even someone that's very very talented and smart like Emeka Egbuka. But we saw the glimpses of him and his performance in year one. Look at weeks 1 through 5 in this graphic, where he was wide receiver 6 in yards per route run. He was wide receiver 3 in fantasy points per game through week 5. And then week 6 to 18, his targets per route run were, wide receiver 12, but his points per game ended up falling off a cliff, and he was 7.8 fantasy points per game in PPR leagues at wide receiver 54. You know, a lot of it was he didn't have catchable targets. Baker was injured, the offensive line got injured, and Egbuka was suffering from hamstring tweak. I think there's a lot of opportunity for Egbuka to be a fantasy stud this year as well. Looking at him in a range of guys with Lad McConkey and Garrett Wilson, those are all guys that I really like. Luther Burden. I don't think you can go wrong with some of those. If things go right for any of those guys, I think that uh, those are all good picks. I think I'd probably take all of them over Chris Olave. Let me just put it that way. I do think that a lot of these guys could pay off more than a T. Higgins too, because they have the opportunity to boom more than T. Higgins does. But yeah, I kind of group them all in that same kind of cluster. Travis Hunter was listed as the Jaguars breakout, but more so for defense. I think that's notable. And move forward. And there's some more content that I saw on Malik Neighbors. There's a clip of John Harbaugh doing a interview where he basically said nobody knows when it comes to Malik Neighbors, and that matches what Jordan Renan said a few days ago, which I tweeted out as well. Um, I have more on Malik Neighbors later, so we don't have to go into too much depth right now. And then on the now there's some articles on offensive coordinator schemes and different things like that. So for Mike LaFleur, for those that are interested in what his scheme may look like, we're going to see a lot of motion and play action, which we know are fantasy cheat codes. They want to create the illusion of complexity. Trey McBride said that, and they will also run the same plays with small tweaks like motion, like they'll add motion to a play one time, or they'll have a different formation but have the same play again with the same personnel, so that they just kind of keep the defense on their toes. So the goal is to keep the defense. Well, the goal is to keep their defense on their toes without a tendency hit and movement for confusion. I was not reading that part. That was just my natural thoughts. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be in a Bellcow role. Let's just put it out there. He is my 1.1 in fantasy drafts, redraft leagues, probably in dynasty leagues too, across the spectrum. Basically, he has game breaking ability, and we know that. We've seen the explosive plays. The writer here, Justin Rogers, who's been covering the Lions for a very long time, I definitely remember reading his stuff back in the day. He's the team's bell cow. Still, his workload will continue to be monitored. While there will be a random week or two where he racks up 30 touches, it would be surprising to see him draw 300 carries next season. You don't want Gibbs to get 300 carries. What we want is for him to have 250 carries and 100 receptions, because that would be incredible. And I think that is the 100 receptions would be out of this world. But if somehow they can get him up into the 70s or something, that would be immaculate for him. And the fact that they even mentioned that he might get a week or two of 30 touches gets me revved up, because that is exactly what I want to see We don't want anybody to have. There's not very many running backs that get 30 touches in a week. The fact that he has the opportunity to do that twice in a season, amazing. We keep going on with the news. Um, I've been trying to do a good job of promoting some of the work that I'm doing. Thank you guys for your support. I really, really appreciate it. It's been great to serve all of you guys. Geno Smith, as we talked about him earlier, it seems like he's cleared from a legal standpoint for this season for 2026. That can always change. Obviously, the new evidence can be entered, all sorts of stuff. But for now, he's good to go. And I actually think he's a dark horse to stay the quarterback for the entire season. I don't know that Klubnik is really that enticing to the team that they may just want to use him as a development piece for this season. Um, Aaron Glenn and Frank Reich are basically on their last legs. So if they do end up having a decent output, let's just say that they get like 4 wins and then closer to the end of the season, they're trying to build positive momentum, keep their jobs. I still think that they would play Geno Smith so that they show some more wins and potentially are able to save their jobs. Some notes on Bo Nix. Um, Basically, they're handing over the keys to Davis Webb as the play caller because they feel like he has the ability to unlock specific traits about Bo Nix. And there's more on this a little bit later too. I tweeted it out today. But what they want to do is get Bo Nix to be a little bit more aggressive. As you guys know, he's kind of a check down Charlie at the moment. Adding Jalen Waddle certainly helps because he's a really good separator in general, but he is much more dynamic as well when it comes to that. Um, so adding him into the fray, they want to move the ball past the sticks more often and throw past the sticks more often. So I think we could see a little bit more aggression out of Bo Nix this season, who the league in pass attempts last year, and that could be awesome for his fantasy value to not just be a check down Charlie. The run pass splits for the Raiders and some information on Ashton Jeanty and Kirk Cousins. Sounds like Clint Kubiak wants to lean on the run game this season. They want to give the O line some time to gel. Get a lead. They signed Tyler Linderbaum this season, who is, but for all intents and purposes, the best center in the league. Centers are notable because they usually set the protections. They're usually the leaders of the offensive line. Getting a guy like that in there is going to help this offensive line quite a bit. But what's important about that is that it's going to take some time for that offensive line to gel. So we don't want to get Fernando Mendoza into the mix too early. Kirk Cousins can help all of that kind of stuff too because he's just an experienced quarterback, and he'll know to get the ball out quick as well. And he's not going to be trying to make like big plays or anything. He'll take what the defense gives him. So it's going to be Kirk Cousins to start. I don't know when we'll see Mendoza. I think that it could be about week 8 when we see him, which is when they play the Jets. Seems like the safest matchup to kind of get him out there, but we'll see what ends up happening. It all kind of depends on how the season trends. NFL Insiders had an update on Daniel Jones. He's medically cleared to do everything. The Colts start training camp on July 28th for veterans. They might take it easy with him a little bit in training camp. I mean, coming off a major injury, you still want to do that, but for all intents and purposes, week 1, I'm not scared at all. He should be the quarterback to start the season. Uh, on Jalen Waddle in the same podcast, they talked about finally having that opportunity to be wide receiver 1, which I think makes so much sense. There's people that are still thinking that Courtland Sutton is going to be the wide receiver 1. Nope, it's Jalen Waddle. He is going to be a game breaker for this team. He's going to get to go against his best friend, Patrick Surtain, in training camp. Very excited about that opportunity to see him thrive against the best cornerback in the NFL. Cameron Wolf also said on Jaden Daniels, he believes that he is going to try. They're going to try to keep him in the pocket more often to keep him healthy. Um, that's not good from a fantasy perspective. We want to see those scrambles, but these players have natural instincts. They'll probably still take off. Maybe you just cut his scramble rate by like half a point to a 1 point, something like that from his rookie season. We'll see how it actually plays out. Then more on Stefon Diggs, Cam Wolf. Again, talking about Stefon Diggs and the Commanders and Brandon Ayuk. says to look out for Diggs for the Commanders. Again, we saw the report earlier on this pod talking about Jeremy Fowler mentioning that, and now we see Cam Wolf mentioning that. Do we think that it's going to happen? I mean, it's where there's smoke, there's usually fire, especially when you see all of these insiders talking about the same thing. Um, and then there's nothing going on with Commanders and Ayuk right now. Later in the show, they talked about Diggs some more a little bit. They know that he's going to be on a team eventually, so I think that's important because a lot of people are worried. Hey, would he just not get signed? He has suitors. He's going to be fine. Cleared of anything from a legal standpoint currently that could impact his ability to play this season. And we know, and they also said that the Commanders are looking for a wide receiver too, which I think is important. I would not. I tweeted this later, but I would not really want to take an Antonio Williams right now. I think give it 2 weeks, see if they sign Diggs, see if they sign anybody else. Keenan Allen was also reported. I'll talk about him in a little bit. But yes, there's a bunch of veterans who haven't signed yet, but these guys, Stefon Diggs, Deebo Samuels, Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen, DeAndre Hopkins, Najee Harris, Antonio Gibson, Darren Waller, Jonnu Smith, Zach Ertz. These are guys that are going to limit other players in fantasy. So it's important to keep up with me, giving you the signals of where everything is, so that how these players impact other players in fantasy when they do eventually get signed. Let's see. There's more here on Stefon Diggs. We had a report from Schefter. So now we've got Cameron Wolf, we've got Jeremy Fowler, and we've got Schefter all mentioning that Stefon Diggs could be on the Commanders. Um, he actually mentioned that Diggs would potentially take Ayuk's spot that was supposed to be on the Commanders. He did say that the Chiefs are a logical fit, but I think that was more off the cuff in terms of what he thinks would be a fit and not necessarily a report that they're interested. And he did say that Diggs should have a team early in camp, which is consistent with previous reports that I've heard as well. So I'm not concerned about Stefon Diggs and where he might end up, whether he's going to sign. It's pretty much a matter of a week or two before he does sign. Some reports on Bashal Tutin. Many opinions in the piece from Jaguars.com. Most believe that Bashal Tutin is going to emerge. One beat did mention that Chris Rodriguez could have the early down role, but I'm worried about his foot. I talked about it the other day. I wrote it in my article. I think it is a Jones fracture from all the reports that I've read, not just Twitter analysts. I have some stuff that's going on in the background. But I think it's a Jones fracture, and I'm worried about that and how that may impact him for the future. On Oronde Gadsden, this is from the Chargers website. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but as training camp looms, expect Oronde Gadsden to have more of a featured role in the pass game. Belief that the quick pass game should benefit Gadsden as well. This is conflicting with Daniel Popper's note on Charlie Kolar potentially, but the way that I'm playing this is there's times that I want to take some Gadsden. It depends on the situation, depends on how much past ADP. We've seen the talent, and it's hard to find talent like that, especially late. But I am still scared that he won't have that, 60% plus, 70% plus pass route share role. I'd actually be surprised if it was above 70%. So that's the main worry. But sometimes you have to bet on upside. So I can definitely understand why people would be interested in taking him. There's some information on Oscar Delp as well. The Saints envision him as a wide tight end, which is different than the way that they use Juwan Johnson. This enables them to be more multiple, because Noah Fant is more similar to Juwan Johnson, and they believe that Delp can help make an impact with both the run blocking and pass blocking, which is great. I'm excited about him as a potential dynasty asset. Don't know that he'll have much value this year from a redraft perspective, but you never know. things kind of work out like that, if he can carve out that role and be trusted, kind of like more like an AJ Barner, where it's like, hey, you can block and you can catch, great. It's hard to do that as a rookie tight end, but we've seen it happen. Then you never know. There's an opportunity. Schefter had some. He speculated a little bit on Charbonnet's timeline. He does not believe that um, he would be available in the first 4 games of the season or even the first half of the season. So that kind of matches with all of the timelines. Roughly like 9 months post op. From an ACL perspective, I tore my ACL, so I have a little bit more knowledge about this. Mine was actually worse. It was 2 meniscus, ACL, MCL, all everything. Um, so I know kind of how that goes. But yeah, and then he also talked about Jadarian Price and George Holani. Um, but the way that it all sounded to me was that it's going to be a running back by committee, and then it's undecided at the moment. The players haven't really been in pads, so it's obvious that that makes sense to be the case, like that it's undecided right now because we got to see running backs in pads. That's the only way you can really judge them. Some notes on Isaiah Bond from this Locked On Browns podcast. His route tree has definitely grown beyond just deep shots. It's good to know because deep shots are kind of a one-trick pony. He's running slants, digs, crossing routes from both the slot and outside now. That's huge for his production. He was doing well in OTA's minicamp. I think he's a good last round, like dart throw type of player in some of these deeper best ball, like 20-round best ball type of drafts, because he could easily, I think he'll be their wide receiver 3 by the end of the season. But there's also opportunity for him to be the wide receiver 2 or even 1 above Boston or Casey Conception. I wouldn't make that bet, but there's the chances there. Moving further on to some of the numbers that I have. So the running back pecking order for the Lions is Jahmyr Gibbs as the bell cow, who takes on more than last year. Isaiah Pacheco is the clear handcuff. They talked about him in the Montgomery role, which I don't think is the true full Montgomery role, but more so like, hey, maybe you'll do some short yardage, maybe you'll do 20% of the rushing attempts, stuff like that, instead of like the full Monty role. And then Sion Vaki is the running back 3. It's good to know that there's a clear handcuff in this situation. Jets tight end room. I wrote a lot about this actually. The team said that they have 12 personnel in mind to help in the run game, but they were talking about how versatile Mason Taylor and Jeremy Ruckert are with being able to line up in line and flex out. But the issue is that Kenyon Sadiq is more of the F type of tight end, more of a slot type of tight end for now. And with that, I mean, that could limit his role. But I did do some analytics on how this usually plays out for tight ends. The tight end route shares, like percentage of tight ends that buy draft capital that get above a 60% route share in round 1, like Kenyon Sadiq, by mid-season, he will be above a 60% route share. And that's basically what the analytics points to. I could see him being below to start the year, just given the surgery that he had and the fact that he had missed time early, and they have an adequate tight end in Mason Taylor that the coaches that are still there drafted. So I could see him starting out a little bit rocky, but by mid-season, I think he'll have what I consider mainly a full-time role at tight end. Moving forward, we have the Matt Waldman talked about Isaiah Bond too. I mean, he had him as a really compelling route runner back in college, and then I actually mentioned that Isaiah Bond didn't even have most of the offseason last year to acclimate. So the fact that he does now is pretty big. And then we've got more notes on the Cleveland Browns and how they might be looking to incorporate KC Conception this season. Lots of pre-snap motion, quick screens, misdirection to get him scripted, easy touches, which matches previous reports that I read earlier. It's a good floor building pattern. I mean, we like to see scripted touches. It's good. to get involved early, but we would like to also see him run more of a full route tree and not just do screens. So there's some risk there. I also think they like him in a slot role for now. So I think that actually Denzel Boston will play more than him to start the season. But maybe by mid-season or so, we should see him in more of a full-time, 70% plus route share type of role, as they kind of wean off of a guy like Jerry Jeudy. Um, but yeah, and he's, I think he's still a really good pick where he's going. He's going in kind of like the early-ish to mid-ish 100s, depending on what kind of draft you're doing. And his talent is through the roof. Brett Whitefield had him as kind of near his top wide receiver one. I think he was wide receiver two in this draft class for him. On Quinshon Judkins from that same article, it sounds like Judkins didn't, obviously came into last offseason, missed a lot of it, everything like that. But then in the spring and summer, he didn't really have opportunities to develop that pass catching role. So this builds on the story that I was talking about later. So the team limited him a little bit there. But the writer believes he could see a bigger role in the pass game and that he will see the bulk of the run game work, which I agree he will. Projections basically state that as well. For Harold Fannin, the writer believes that Harold Fannin, this is from The Athletic, could lead the team in targets again, and he speculates on whether the team will go heavier personnel and have Fannin in the slot or out wide, or have him play inline. I think that's big because if he does play slot or out wide and they go more heavier personnel, you're going to see less Casey Conception because he's basically being put into the slot role for now. And so early season, like that just takes away from Casey Conception if you have Harold Fannin stretched out into that slot position. Peter Bukowski, who covers the Packers, was talking about the Packers offense and wide receivers. He said there's a lot of pressure on Christian Watson to be the wide receiver one and Matthew Golden to be the wide receiver two. He sees that the Packers will probably go with more tempo and play faster this season, with less heavier sets and subs. So just thinking about that. So you think about it, if they go with a heavy personnel and then they need to pass the ball, they usually sub in a guy like Jaden Reed, and that sub time allows the defense to sub and doesn't allow you to play with tempo. You have to keep switching guys in and out. You can play faster if you keep the same guys on the field, and that's basically what he's talking about. Less rotation, less mixing of personnel, keeping 11 personnel out on the field with Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, Matthew Golden, not rotating receivers as often is also something that he talked about. And then being more hyper targeted. This is underrated. I don't think that anybody's really, really planning it out to be this way. If we see 80% route shares for a guy like Christian Watson, or 70% plus from Jaden Reed and Matthew Golden, it's going to be huge for their fantasy value. They are cheap at at their current prices based off of that, especially Jaden Reed, who is a target earner. On top of that, what I've consistently read is that they've torn this offense down to the studs for the Packers. And what that means is what they're trying to do is lean into being more of a Jordan Love friendly offense. Put more on his shoulders. They've talked about how he's gotten better with pre-snap control, pre-snap processing as well. There's questions at running back. Jacobs was kind of injured last year. He struggled with efficiency. Marshawn Lloyd can't stay healthy usually. If they lean into 11 personnel, it would be more pass centric as well. So I think that there's potential that this team starts to lean into the pass more, which is also what Peter Bukowski mentioned in his podcast. The Saints, the Saints, what they ended up doing yesterday is they renegotiated Alvin Kamara's contract. As we had reported multiple times this offseason, they thought that he would stay with the team. Mickey Loomis, famous for always wanting to keep guys with the Saints long term, and have them retire as Saints. On top of that, there was just tea leaves in general that Alvin Kamara wanted to stay with the team. So he was willing to take that pay cut and do that. The big thing to me there is that cuts into some of Travis Etienne's pass catching role. So I'd probably trend him a little bit down. I think he'll fall maybe a round or so. And then on top of that, they have guys like Devin Neal and Kendre Miller, who I think are interesting running backs. Who one of those two may end up getting cut because teams usually only keep 3 running backs on their team. Could get cut, could get traded. Um, and that means that they would have an opportunity to join a different team. Could they get them on the practice squad? It's hard to retain talents like that on the practice squad. There's too many other teams that need running backs that have some talent, like a Devin Neal or Kendre Miller, that if they do get cut, I think that they would probably get picked up by another team before they end up on the practice squad. George Pickens signed his contract franchise tag. Not really worried about him. I think he's good to go. Did a best ball draft yesterday. You guys can check that out on my YouTube. Like, subscribe, share with people too. If you like the content and you like this tight 10, definitely share it with other people. I'm looking to grow my subscriber base over time, and I appreciate those who have listened so far. Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson will probably have extensions that happen within the next month or so. That's big for dynasty owners to just know that they're going to be on that same team long term. NFL insiders talked about Patrick Mahomes. He should be ready to go week 1. It's the cheapest we've ever been able to draft a guy like Patrick Mahomes in fantasy drafts. So very big to me. Someone that I'm willing to take chances on. Obviously, I would probably double up on quarterback, get someone more reliable, especially for early season. But you can get Patrick Mahomes pretty easily after some names that are somewhat more questionable. So I'm interested in taking shots on him right now, and then pairing him with a guy that comes maybe after him, like a Brock Purdy or something like that too. More drumbeat this time from the insiders, talking about Stefon Diggs to the Commanders or Ravens. I put my projection out there, 50% likelihood for him to end up on the Commanders, 25% the Ravens, and 25% a surprise. Wouldn't be surprised within the next 2 weeks we're going to hear something that happens with him. I would put a lot on the fact that he's probably a Commander. I've been wrong before, so let's see. George Holani, Matt Waldman posted, he's a running back guru. When I look for running back like values, understanding how good running backs are, he's a guy that I always have latched on to for his analysis. But he basically said that he's good. He's a good football player. You know, he showed it in college. He had injuries. He got into some unfortunate situations with some good running backs coming before him. But he's a good football player. And my point here is that he was an undrafted free agent. He got a chance to play for a team that made the Super Bowl last year. He showed really well in preseason in the past. Is he going to be a star? I don't think so. But is he going to have a role? Yeah, I think he's going to play the pass catching role. We don't know if he's going to be the goal line guy. They may do that. But I think that he'll play a role, and you never know if he's just really good and he ends up being kind of like Rico Dowdle and just stands out and ends up earning more. I think he's a really good draft pick in the last round of drafts right now. And then Jeremy Fowler went on the John Keim report, which John Keim writes for ESPN, covers the Commanders, and talked about the Commanders considering Stefon Diggs. And then this is the first time I'd heard Keenan Allen mentioned there too. But important to note that he said, Jeremy Fowler said that Keenan Allen's more open to not playing in LA like he previously had said. He also said that Diggs is probably going to have a market of about $8 to $12 million or so. And then he doesn't think the Chiefs want to spend that kind of money. So I don't think he's going to be on the Chiefs. Again, think that he's going to be on the Commanders. We'll see where that goes. They also mentioned that Diggs is willing to take a hometown discount, and that the Ravens are also a match. So again, Ravens, Commanders, we'll see where it lands. I think it'll probably end up being the Commanders. And if so, if he goes to the Commanders, then Jaden Daniels is still going too cheap. He might be cheap already. And then you think about where Keenan Allen might go, the fact that he's okay with being on a different team other than the Chargers, or being in LA. That means that if he does sign somewhere where the place that I've heard the most is the Colts and his relationship with Shane Steichen. and even from the Colts beat, what I was reading was that he would be more of a third down role and help with de-risking Alec Pierce. I think what would end up happening is that Josh Downs would fall, and I still think Josh Downs will play a significant role regardless if they sign a guy like Keenan Allen or Deebo Samuel or whoever else. It sounds like they want to give him more of a full-time role regardless. So buying Josh Downs after his inevitable dip that happens when they sign a guy, if they sign a guy, I think that's a good move. More on the Packers wide receiver rotation and Matthew Golden. It sounds like the Packers wanted fewer wide receivers so they could lean into playing their main guys more. The GM said that it was noted in this article that the GM cleared the path for Matthew Golden to get more playing time by moving on from Romeo Doubs and Dontavian Wicks. So it really sounds like we won't have that typical wide receiver rotation in Green Bay this season, which would be huge for all those guys. We talked about that already. Keep reading that it's wheels up for Greg Dulcich. The GM said that he's looking forward to seeing him play. Could be close to a full-time player. It would be no surprise if he is the favorite target. It's hard to find late-round tight ends that could be a top 2 target on the team. I would buy him in drafts based on where he's going right now. We had a Breer Monday morning quarterback report on Malik Neighbors, and what he said was every tea leaf there is to read is saying Malik Neighbors may not be there week 1. I'm not counting on it. Every medical professional that I trust has basically said that it's going to be tough for him to be effective, at least in week 1. If he is active, he might not be the star that he is. Let him hit training camp PUP, which I think is a virtual lock. If he hits training camp PUP, his value will drop. And then if you do want him, that's the right time to take him, is later when he does hit that training camp PUP. On Dontavian Wicks from The Athletic, the Eagles have a real plan for him. He's locked in as a top 3 wide receiver. It's good to know. I think he'll have a 60% plus route share this season, which is good enough for late round picks in best ball drafts, or even in redraft leagues if you think that he's really talented. Packers wide receiver rotation. Nope, I already talked about that. My show with Graham Barfield went live this morning, so please go check that out on YouTube. Comment, like, subscribe. Give me feedback. I haven't been doing mic work for very long, so please, even if you have feedback on this, please DM me. I haven't missed a DM yet. Talking to all you individuals, love doing it. It's been fun. Yeah. Looking into more news, Zachariah Branch update for those, especially in Dynasty. Some redraft leagues you might be interested as well. Branch was one of the most involved players on offense throughout organized team activities and minicamp, per The Athletic. Early role indicator to me. He has a lot of athleticism, very electric. Kind of reminds me of Kadarius Toney a little bit, which people think about the hands with Kadarius Toney and what ended up happening. But there was a stretch in Kadarius Toney's rookie year where he was a wide receiver. I believe he was a wide receiver 1 during a stretch of time. I think that Branch will probably get gadget work early, and then we'll have a chance to earn more. Could be a good stash for people as the season goes on. Let's see, is there any other notes that I have? I hit 10,000 followers today. Thank you guys so much for all of that. I put a little picture of myself from 2010. Can't believe on the University of Southern Cal campus where I went for 1 semester. I'll get into that story one other day, but thank you guys so much for everything that you guys have done to boost me up. Most recent last tweet here, Davis Webb's big offseason focus as the Denver's new play caller was getting Bo Nix into rhythm earlier. The Broncos want to lean more into early game tempo and no huddle, meaning they're going to play faster, which means more potential plays, more potential pass attempts. The goal is to get Nix into a rhythm early in the game. He has the lowest passer rating in the first quarter among qualifying quarterbacks in the NFL since he entered the league. So it'll be imperative to get him more acclimated. There's so much upside with Bo Nix, adding Jalen Waddle, them playing faster, playing more in general, more plays. I'm very excited. All right, guys. I think we covered a lot today. very, very happy that I was able to get this new background going. Again, like, subscribe, share with friends and family. Thank you guys so much. Talk to you guys again soon. It was the Tight 10 once again.